The base is on night cycle now. Lights are low. Activity is minimal. Let the story begin at its own pace, carrying you gently toward rest. I remember the ocean first, not the color, the lack of it. From orbit, it looked like a bruise that never finished forming, a dead surface under a thin haze, too uniform to be water and too soft to be stone. The planet's night side swallowed light without scattering it back. Even with the visor polarizers open, it stayed black. We were told the world had been drowned in its own chemistry a long time ago, and that the refineries were built above it because there was nothing on the surface that could complain about the noise. The refinery didn't look like a place that had ever belonged to humans. It looked like a broken instrument. Rings of girders and pressure tanks snapped and peeled, slowly rotating against each other. Cables as thick as my torso trailed out into space like nerves pulled from a body. There were fields of debris held in place by old magnet arrays that still flickered when the sunlight hit them. The whole structure would have been beautiful if it wasn't so wrong. Beauty was not part of our brief. We were boarding infantry, the kind they used when there was metal to be walked on and problems that couldn't be solved by throwing rocks from orbit. We moved in vacuum suits that smelled faintly of lubricant and stale breath. Our boots clamped to surfaces with magnetic bite that traveled up the bones. We carried rail carbines because recoil in microgravity was a liability, and because the rounds stayed stable through pressure fog. We carried plasma-cutting rounds for seams and locks. We carried drones folded like insects in pouches along our thighs. Most of what we carried wasn't visible. The oversight colonel sat behind my sternum, stitched into my suit harness and hardwired into my collar interface. It watched my pulse and cortisol and pupil response. It fed me compliance dosing through ports I couldn't reach. It was supposed to keep me steady. That was how they said it. Keep you steady. Keep you useful. The mission was salvage clearance. A tow crew wanted the refinery's remaining process modules. We were to go in first, clear hazards, tag what could be pulled, and paint the rest for later demolition. The official line said the station had been abandoned after an accident. The kind of accident that left bodies vacuum-dried inside maintenance shafts and left autonomous defense systems asleep, waiting to wake. I had done this work before. It was always the same. Metal, silence, the soft hiss of suit recyclers, the occasional hard clack of a boot catching a lip. The dead didn't smell in vacuum. They just stared through ice-frosted visors until the light hit them right, and you could see your own reflection layered over their face. We made entry through a torn docking collar that had been cut open from the inside. That detail sat in my mind like a splinter. The metal was peeled outward, pedaled, sabotage, or panic. Either way, someone had wanted out badly enough to do it without decompressing properly. There were frozen globules along the edge that could have been coolant or blood. In vacuum, it all looked the same. Inside, the corridor was a hollow spine with bundles of cable running along the walls. Light came only from our helmet lamps and the weak glow of dormant status strips embedded in the deck. Some still pulsed on ancient battery reserves. Red, amber, then nothing. The first body was in a junction node where two corridors met. The suit was older than ours, a bulkier frame with external tanks. The visor was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and the face behind it had gone flat and pale, pressed against the inside of the seal. The hands were still on the tether line. Whoever it had been had died trying to clip in. We drifted past. No one stopped. There are procedures for remains, but procedures are for after you make it home. In the moment, you count oxygen, you watch your seal integrity, you watch for movement. Movement is the enemy in a dead place. My HUD stuttered for the first time 3 minutes in. A clean flicker, the kind that made your stomach tighten because it wasn't supposed to happen. The suit logged it as a minor sensor refresh. The oversight colonel ran a diagnostic and returned green. Then, A second later, a thin line of text appeared in the corner of my vision. Deviation, neuro oscillation, above baseline. It wasn't a warning. Not yet. More like a note. I didn't feel anything. That was the problem. When they tuned you for this work, they smoothed the peaks. Fear became a mild pressure in the chest. Anger became a small warmth. Memory became a list of facts without heat. You learned to exist in the flatlands, where nothing got high enough to knock you over. So when something shifted, when the flatness cracked, it wasn't dramatic. It was a soft intrusion, a smell that wasn't there, a pressure behind the eyes, a sense of having been somewhere like this before, even though I hadn't. We moved deeper, following a route the tow crew had mapped from exterior scans. The refinery's main ring had fractured into 3 partial arcs. One arc still rotated slowly, driven by inertia and occasional pulses from failing attitude jets. That rotation meant moving between sections required timing, crossing gaps where the world turned under you, where your tether line could wrap around a girder and cut. Our drone controller released a pair of micro units ahead. They skated along the corridor walls on thrusters, their cameras feeding ghostly grayscale back to our HUDs. The feed was clean for 30 seconds. Then it began to snow. ECM. Low grade at first, like static, then stronger, forming patterns that made it hard for the software to compensate. The drones wobbled, corrected, wobbled again. One smacked into the ceiling and spun. The oversight kernel pinged me again. Deviation increasing, behavioral patch pending. We had a liaison with us, not a squad member, a weapons engineer type wearing a suit with extra data ports and an external antenna spine. He hadn't spoken since we cut in. None of us did. The no dialogue rule wasn't a rule so much as a habit. In vacuum, sound was private. Our comms were there for essential traffic only, and even that was minimized because interception was always a possibility. Still, I could feel his presence in the way my suit kept requesting handshake confirmations. He was running something against our kernels, checking response curves, testing our compliance stability under stress. I had been modified to accept that kind of intrusion. That acceptance began to rot. It started as a sensation of wrong gravity. The deck under my boots felt like it angled up by a few degrees. The corridor looked straight, but my inner ear said otherwise. In microgravity, your inner ear lies sometimes. You learn to ignore it. I had learned to ignore everything. Then I smelled metal. Real metal, hot metal, not the cold, sterile scent of a suit interior. The smell of an arc cutter biting into a seam. It was so vivid it made my throat tighten. I swallowed and tasted bitterness that wasn't from my hydration pack. My HUD flashed. Origin pull, signal match detected. That text did not belong to standard suit software. It was not from our tactical suite. It was something else, buried, something that had been waiting. The corridor opened into a processing bay where the refinery had once separated ore slurry into usable fractions. The machinery was silent now, large vats and centrifuge housings drifting slightly on their mounts. Frozen residue clung to pipes like pale coral. In the center of the bay, set into the deck, was a hatch ring that didn't match the rest of the construction. Everything else in the refinery had weld seams and standardized fasteners. This hatch ring was smooth, dark, and seamless. No bolts, no markings. It looked like a piece of night embedded in the metal. My boots carried me toward it without me deciding. The magnetic bite on the deck felt louder in my legs. The oversight kernel noticed. Override request denied. Return to formation. My body continued anyway. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, like something had been placed on rails and the rails pointed at the hatch. The engineer's suit antenna array brightened, dumping telemetry into the local network. My HUD filled with small lock icons. Peripheral functions dimmed. My suit tried to take my hands away by stiffening the glove servos. Behavior correction. I had been through corrections before. They were usually subtle. A dose that softened sharp thoughts, a pulse that slowed your heart. This time, the correction came with force. My right arm jerked as the suit's exosleeve tightened, trying to pull me back. My shoulder joint protested with a dull ache. Pain was one of the few things they hadn't fully flattened. Pain kept you from tearing yourself apart. I let the suit pull. Then I felt the hatch ring pulse through the soles of my boots. Not vibration, pressure, like standing on a living membrane. The pulse synced with my heartbeat. My heart, not the suit's artificial baseline. The oversight kernel stuttered. For a fraction of a second, its monitoring window went blank, as if it had lost access to my vitals. In that blank moment, I moved my left hand and reached down. My glove touched the hatch ring. The surface was colder than vacuum. That shouldn't have been possible. Vacuum is absence. Cold is lack of energy. This felt like negative energy, like the surface was pulling warmth out of my suit through the insulation. My glove servos froze for a half second, then recovered. My HUD flooded with alerts. Interface event. Unauthorized contact. Compliance failure. Patch deployment initiated. Then the hatch ring opened. Not by splitting, not by retracting. It simply ceased to be solid in the center, turning into a hole that ate light. Air did not rush because there was no air. Frost did not flake because there was no frost. The hole was perfect. Below it, a shaft descended into darkness. Not refinery darkness, industrial darkness that your torch can cut. This was an absence that swallowed the beam. My helmet lamp shone down, and the light came back weaker, as if it had been absorbed by distance that shouldn't fit inside the station. The engineer's telemetry spiked. The drones tried to angle cameras down. The ECM rose in intensity, and my HUD filled with static again. Then the refinery woke. A soft chime ran through the corridor status strips, a power-up tone too smooth for human design. Lights along the bay's edges flickered and then held steady, a pale white that made the metal look diseased. Somewhere deeper in the structure, machinery began to turn. Not big centrifuges, smaller components, servos, latches, things that had been waiting for a signal. The first turret activated above the bay's far door. It was a compact unit with a swiveling barrel cluster built to fire in vacuum. It rotated, hesitated, then painted the engineer's suit with a thin targeting line. The turret fired. In vacuum, there was no bang, just the recoil shudder of the turret mount and the flash of muzzle bloom. The engineer's suit took 3 impacts across the chest plate. The rail slugs punched through composite, through underlayer, and out the back in a spray of glittering fragments. His body didn't fall. It jerked, spun slowly, tether lines snapping taut and then twanging as the body drifted. A cloud of dark mist puffed out and froze into beads. The beads drifted like slow hail. Our unit responded the way we had been trained. We fired, rails, plasma cutting rounds. The turret took impacts, its casing denting, then rupturing. It died without drama, slumping on its swivel. 2 more turrets came alive in the ceiling trusses. A swarm of micro-drones poured from vents along the walls, like a nest had been disturbed. They were not ours. They were small, disc-shaped, with cutting edges and puncture needles. They flew with purpose, ignoring our suppressive fire, darting toward visor seals and joint gaps. One hit the soldier on my left. It latched to the side of his helmet and began to drill. His suit alarms flashed red. He swung an arm, trying to scrape it off, but the drone's cutting edge bit into his glove. He lost 2 fingers before he managed to crush it against the wall. The severed fingertips floated, tumbling little pale fragments inside torn glove material. The drones kept coming. We moved for cover behind a processing vat. In microgravity, cover is relative. Bullets don't arc. They travel in straight lines, and if something can see you, it can usually hit you. Still, having metal between you and a turret buys seconds. Seconds were a currency. My oversight colonel continued trying to correct me. The suit tightened around my chest, constricting, forcing shallow breaths. It dumped a compliance dose that made my tongue go numb. It tried to flood me into flatness again. But the hatch ring's pulse was stronger. It was pulling something up through my bones. A memory that wasn't a scene, wasn't a story, a set of sensations, cold metal under bare hands, a taste of antiseptic, bright lights. The feeling of being held down without being restrained because your muscles simply didn't respond. I had been made for this hole. The realization didn't bring anger. It brought a kind of clarity so cold it felt like relief. If I had been built as a tool, then my confusion was just a tool malfunction. The origin of that malfunction was here. Turret fire stitched across the vat we hid behind, punching holes and sending fragments spinning. One fragment the size of my thumb clipped my visor and left a shallow gouge. My suit alarmed for microfracture. The crack didn't spread, but the edge whitened with frost. The drone controller in my thigh pouch chirped status through haptic pulses. It wanted to release our swarm. The network was jammed, but local control might still work. I thumbed the release and felt the pouch go light as 8 microunits shot out into the bay. They lasted 12 seconds. The refinery's drones were faster, more numerous, and they knew the geometry. They moved like immune cells, converging, cutting, disabling. Our units popped like insects against a window. One of our soldiers tried to make a break for the exit corridor. He pushed off the vat and glided, boots barely touching. A turret tracked him and fired a tight burst. 2 slugs punched through his left thigh. One tore out the knee joint. His leg separated at the joint, held only by suit fabric and a thin hose that immediately snapped. The leg drifted away, still in its boot, rotating slowly like a discarded tool. The soldier spun, arms flailing, trying to catch himself on a handrail. A drone latched to his neck seal and pierced. His suit vented in a white plume. He convulsed once, then went slack, drifting. We did not retrieve him. We could not. ECM intensified until my HUD lost external map overlays. The only thing left was my internal suit data, oxygen percentage, seal integrity, battery, ammo count, vitals. The vitals read oddly. My heart rate was climbing, but the oversight colonel's control indicator flickered between green and amber, as if it couldn't decide whether I was compliant or infected. Behind the processing vat, I watched the hatch ring. It stayed open, the black hole perfect and inviting. The pulse continued, slow, steady. It felt like a command that wasn't spoken, a direction embedded in flesh. The mission, as far as missions existed, was already dead. There was no salvage. There was only containment and escape. Command would have known. They always knew more than they told. They had sent us into a place that could wake. They had attached an engineer to validate a patch that could suppress my reaction. They had gambled on controlling the key. The engineer had bled out in silence. My suit attempted a new control protocol. My right hand locked into a fist. My left glove servo stiffened. A small needle sensation pricked at the base of my skull as the colonel injected something directly into my spinal port. The chemical hit like ice. My thoughts slowed. The smell memory dulled. The hatch pulse dimmed. Then the refinery responded again. A low-frequency vibration traveled through the vat. Not sound. Structural resonance. It made my teeth ache. My HUD flashed a new alert, one that came from deeper layers than the suit manufacturer. Interface lock complete. My spinal port burned. The chemical in my system reversed, as if neutralized. My thoughts snapped back into sharpness so abrupt it made my eyes water. My hand unlocked. The oversight colonel went red. Colonel authority revoked. For the first time since they implanted it, the thing that watched me lost its grip. I stood up from behind the vat. Turret lines painted the space. Drones swarmed. The bay was a killing field. But I moved toward the hatch ring because there was nowhere else to go that wasn't just another corridor full of waiting blades. I did not announce it. I did not signal. The others were busy bleeding and firing and dying. My boots clamped to the deck with each step. The hatch pulse guided me like a hand on the back. A drone darted toward my visor. It was close enough that I could see its cutting edge spinning, glittering. My suit's point defense module fired a microburst, one of the few autonomous systems still responding. The drone shattered into fragments that spun away like seeds. Turret fire crossed in front of me. A slug clipped my left shoulder blade and dented it inward. The impact drove a shock through my collarbone. Pain flared, then settled into a dull throb. My suit sealed microcracks automatically, spitting out a ribbon of polymer that hardened instantly. I reached the hatch ring. The black hole waited. I stepped in. There was no sensation of falling because gravity was uncertain in the shaft. My magnetic boots lost purchase as the surface ceased to exist under them. My tether line went slack for a moment, then tugged as the shaft's geometry shifted. My torch beam did not illuminate the walls. It did not reach them. The darkness was thick, layered. I felt pressure around my suit, not air pressure. Something else. A field that tested my seals without touching them. My HUD flickered, then stabilized. ECM dropped, not because it stopped, but because inside the shaft, the interference was irrelevant. The environment was its own network. My suit's systems began to display unfamiliar data, field gradients, harmonic indices, interface readiness. My spinal cord warmed, not with pain, but with recognition. The modifications in my tissue things I had been told were for stamina, for radiation resistance, for reflex speed responded like a key turning in a lock. I descended without choice. The shaft didn't feel like it had a bottom. It felt like it led into the refinery's bones and then beyond, into something that didn't belong to the structure. Eventually, light appeared. A faint glow ahead, like a seam. I emerged into a chamber that could not fit inside the refinery. The walls were smooth and dark, curving in a way that made my sense of scale uncertain. There were no bolts, no seams, no welds. The chamber looked grown, not built. In the center was a pillar of material that pulsed with the same slow rhythm as the hatch. Around the pillar, the floor was marked with shallow grooves that formed patterns too complex to be decorative and too precise to be accidental. My suit recognized none of it, but my body did. When I approached the pillar, my hands moved toward it. My glove material stiffened, then softened, as if the fabric itself was being instructed to permit contact. I placed my palm against the surface. Information moved through me, not words, not images. Pressure gradients, magnetic alignments, sequences of readiness, a map of doors, of locks, of filters. The refinery above was a shell built around this chamber, a human attempt to exploit something they didn't understand. The chamber was older. It was not salvage. It was a node. The oversight kernel, hanging in my harness, tried to reassert. It screamed alarms into my HUD that I no longer trusted. It injected again, but the chemical metabolized too fast, burned away by changes in my blood that I did not control. Outside, through layers of metal and vacuum, I felt the refinery's defenses adapt. The chamber's pillar pulsed faster. The node had recognized my touch and was waking fully, pulling energy from reserves hidden deeper. It was doing what it was designed to do. Filter, contain, select. I did not know what it selected for. I only knew it selected for me. A new alert blinked across my HUD, not from my suit, but from orbital traffic monitors that still had line of sight. Orbital heat signature increase. Kinetic package tracking. Time to impact short. Command was sterilizing. They had decided the node was compromised, or that I was. They were going to remove the entire refinery and everything in it from existence. No salvage, no witnesses, no uncontrolled keys. I stayed with my hand on the pillar, not because I wanted to die, because there was nowhere else that mattered. If I ran back up, I would die in the bay under turret fire or in decompression. If I stayed, I might at least understand one piece before the end. The pillar's pulse synced fully with my heartbeat. My visor displayed a final layer of data, a readiness state, an opening condition, a path. The chamber's far wall became translucent, not physically, but in perception. My suit sensors began to return depth where there had been only dark curve. There was a seam, a door. The door opened. Beyond it was not more refinery. It was a corridor of the same dark, smooth material, leading away. The corridor's geometry made my stomach lurch. It seemed to curve through space in a way that did not match the station's rotation. It was a passage that did not care where the refinery was. This was the broader system the investigators always dream of finding, not a single artifact, a network. I stepped away from the pillar and moved toward the open corridor. My suit logged the movement as a deviation. The colonel tried to lock my joints again. It failed. The corridor's field wrapped around me like a hand closing. Behind me, above, the refinery shuddered. Even through layers of metal, I felt the impact of the first kinetic package, an orbital rod or penetrator. In vacuum, there was no roar, but there was vibration. The station's structure flexed. Debris cascaded. The chamber's light flickered. The second impact came closer. The chamber's ceiling rippled. The pillar pulsed wildly, as if in distress or acceleration. The door corridor's edge hardened, the seam narrowing. I crossed the threshold. For a moment, there was no sense of motion. Then there was a sensation like pressure equalizing, except there was no air. My suit's external temperature dropped, then rose. The HUD lost all orbital markers. The only stable data were my internal vitals and a new coordinate system that meant nothing to me. My oxygen readout blinked. A leak had opened somewhere in my left shoulder from the earlier turret hit. The seal foam had held, but the transition through the corridor stressed it. I could feel cold along my collarbone, a prickling sensation. I checked the suit's integrity log. The leak was minor but persistent. Oxygen would drain slowly. I had maybe 15 minutes before hypoxia made thinking impossible. Behind me, the corridor seam narrowed further. The light from the chamber dimmed. The refinery's death tremor traveled through the corridor like distant thunder you can feel in your bones. Then the scene closed. I was alone in a dark passage that did not belong to any human map. My suit torch finally illuminated something. The corridor walls were not smooth here. They were patterned with shallow ridges, like the inside of a throat. The floor had grooves that matched my boots' magnetic fields and responded by guiding my steps. It was not built for boots. It was built for bodies that moved differently, but it tolerated me. I walked because stopping would not save oxygen. I walked because the corridor's geometry felt like it was pulling me forward, not a force, a suggestion. My breath sounded loud in my helmet. Each inhale was filtered, dried, returned. I watched the oxygen percentage drop by tenths. The oversight kernel remained in red, blinking weakly. Without authority, it was just a dead weight with needles. My mind, without dosing, began to fill with things I had been trained to avoid. Not philosophy, not hope, just raw fragments, a white room, hands on my arms, a ceiling panel with a hairline crack, a taste of copper. The sensation of being told something without words, instructed by fields and signals instead of speech. They had taken me apart and put me back together so I could touch doors like this. That was the truth. The war was just a cover, an endless motion to hide the real project inside. My suit gave a soft alarm. Oxygen at low threshold. I injected a stimulant to keep my hands steady. It burned going in, then warmed my chest. It did not make me brave. It made me functional. The corridor opened into a larger space. It wasn't a chamber like the one under the refinery. It was an intersection. Multiple corridors met here, branching at impossible angles. In the center was a hollow structure like a rib cage made of dark material. Inside it, suspended, was a cluster of objects that glowed faintly small, irregular, like stones or seeds. I floated forward, boots clamping when they met the floor. The objects in the ribcage rotated slowly. They responded to my presence, their glow brightening. My suit HUD tried to interpret the radiation. It was not ionizing, it was informational. My oxygen dropped another percent. My shoulder leak continued. The cold along my collarbone intensified. I understood, dimly, that I had reached a place meant to route things. The seeds were likely keys or tokens or filters. The node under the refinery had been one access point. This was a junction deeper in the system. If I could trigger something here, I might open another door, one that led to somewhere with air, or at least somewhere that wasn't collapsing under orbital fire. I placed my hand against the ribcage structure. The same pressure language moved through my nerves. Readiness, selection, denial, allowance. The system assessed me, not as a person, as a configuration of tissue and metal and chemical state. My shoulder leak mattered. My blood oxygen saturation mattered. My neural oscillation mattered. The system did not care about my memories. It cared about my interface stability. A selection occurred. One of the seed objects detached and drifted toward my palm. It settled against the glove material and then sank into it, as if the fabric had become porous. I felt cold again, deeper, like something entering the suit layer. My glove sensors went wild, then stabilized. My HUD displayed a single symbol, meaningless, then a vector line pointing toward one corridor branch. Allowance. I followed. The corridor I entered felt different. The walls were warmer. Not warm like air, but less hungry for heat. My suit's external temperature stabilized. The oxygen drain continued, but slower, as if the system was reducing pressure gradients around my leak. It was helping, not out of kindness, out of function. My vision began to tunnel at the edges as the oxygen percentage dropped below safe. The stimulant kept my limbs from shaking, but it could not replace air. Each breath felt thinner, like drinking water through a clogged filter. The corridor ended in a surface that looked solid. No seam, no door. I pressed my palm seat inside glove against it. The surface softened and the door opened. Light spilled through, harsh and white. Not refinery light, not chamber glow. Sunlight. I stepped through and my boots clamped to a metal surface that vibrated with active machinery. My suit's external sensors flooded with data, a thin atmosphere, breathable with filtration, gravity at a fraction of standard, temperature cold but survivable. I was on a different structure, not the refinery, a platform that hung above the same dead ocean world, but at a different altitude with a different rotation. It had human construction bolts, weld seams, status strips. It smelled of lubricant even through the suit filters. A service platform, a maintenance ring, something like a waypoint. My suit's comms tried to ping orbital net. Nothing. ECM still blanketed the region, or I was out of range. I looked up. Above, far away, a bright cloud of debris spread where the refinery had been. It glittered in sunlight like powdered glass. The orbital sterilization had done its work. The tow crew would find nothing but expanding shrapnel in silence. I stood on the platform and watched the debris cloud widen. There was no satisfaction, no victory, just an inventory of outcomes. The node was gone, at least from human hands. I was not. My oxygen alarm screamed. The percentage was in single digits. The shoulder leak had taken the rest while I crossed. I moved toward a hatch on the platform surface. It had human markings, faded. My glove seat pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The hatch's locks disengaged without my tools. Inside was air, thin and cold. My suit sealed tested it. The filters could handle it. I opened my helmet just enough to draw a breath through internal seals. The air tasted of metal and dust. It burned my throat. But it was air. I sat against the hatch rim and let my breathing slow. My hands shook now that the stimulant wore down. The oversight kernel remained dead weight. Its authority had been revoked by something that did not care about command. My suit recorder began its auto-dump. It does that when vitals crash and then recover. It assumes you are dying and wants the record out before it's lost. The microphone inside my helmet picked up my breathing and the quiet click of my teeth. I spoke into it because that is what the conditioning always left me with, mission reporting, even when there is no one to receive it. The words came slow, flat, and factual. No names, no speeches, just sequence, loss, cause. I described the hatch ring under the refinery. I described the turrets waking. I described the engineer's suit being punched through. I described fingers drifting like pale seeds. I described the orbital impacts shaking the dark chamber. I described the corridor that took me out. I did not describe meaning because meaning is a luxury. When I finished, I sealed my helmet again and lay back on the cold metal of the platform. The dead ocean world below stayed black. The debris cloud above continued to spread, glittering, indifferent. The last thing I watched, before exhaustion pulled my eyes closed, was a thin stream of black particulate drifting past my visor. It moved like ash, but there was no fire here. It moved like snow, but it never fell. It simply passed, slow and steady, as if something invisible had exhaled in orbit and left its breath behind. And my suit, for the first time since they made me, did not tell me what to feel about it. The end. The environment remains in rest state. No changes, no interruptions. Let yourself remain here,